seminar, I should call it that way, which title is Europe, US, China, Are Democratic Values a Competitive Advantage? Thanks to the Center for American Studies for hosting us. Thanks to the Festival della Diplomazia, Mr. Giorgio Bartolomucci here and his staff, and thanks to my guests, which are Zach Cooper, a research fellow, American Enterprise Institute from Washington, D.C. Mr. Cooper, thank you for being with us today. Mr. Mario Del Pizzo, journalist of the Italian National Broadcasting RAI and the author of the book America per Noi and America for Us, published by the Lewis University Press, Mr. Mario Del Pizzo. Retired Ambassador Guido Lenzi, author of a book called Diplomacy, published by Rubettino Editori. Ambassador, thank you. Mr. Emiliano Battisti, editorial coordinator of Il Caffè Geopolitico and responsible for North American desk. Mr. Battisti, you. Myself, I'm Romeo Orlandi, forgive me for that. I'm an economist, a sinologist, and I'm also vice president of the Italy-ASEAN Association. As you know, ASEAN is the shortcut for Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Today, we're going to discuss a very important issue. The democratic experiences, are they universal? Can they be applicable to every country? The question up to a few decades ago would be simple, even silly to ask. Mainly after the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent fall of the Soviet Union, the answer was in favor of democracy because that proved to be consistent with the economic development, respect of human rights, and prosperity in general for the countries. The common perception was, let's say, at least 90% of the scholars, politicians, economists, they thought there was no question about it. Some scholar, for example, Professor Francis Fukuyama, they reached the conclusion that a certain history, the ideological battle between two systems was over. With the victory of the capitalistic system, with the democratic system, with the system which respects the human rights and favors the individual entrepreneurship. Then came China. And China casted the shadow of doubts over our belief. And China proved, or at least the economic results of China, proved that democracy can be a choice rather than a necessity, can be a possibility rather than a postulate. We can choose democracy or we can choose another way to develop. That is very disturbing since we thought that there is no other way to reach prosperity than freedom. There is no other way to defeat underdevelopment than individualism and democracy. So I'm old enough to remember the debate we had those years. We thought that Washington was not only richer than Moscow, but it was richer exactly because it was freer, more respectful of the human rights. Then China proved something disturbing, not because China is better, because China is different. And difference sometimes proved to be effective, like, for example, defeating poverty in China. In some other cases, proved not to be effective, like, for example, respect of human rights, labor standard, environmental standard, and so on. So I try to articulate a bit more the title we are discussing today, but without any further ado, let the other more competent friends and guests to talk about this issue. Zach Cooper from American Enterprise Institute in Washington. Zach, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you.
Before you start, theoretically, we should say within a round of 7 minutes. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I'm really happy to get a chance to be with all of you today. I wish I could be there in Rome, but virtual will have to do. So I've been working on this question of how much we should focus on values for several years. And I think the reality is that we have to talk about values and we have to talk about interests when we focus on the China challenge. For the United States, this is particularly hard right now. When we go to Asia, we see many Asian friends who are not democracies, right? We need to work closely with Vietnam, with Singapore. We have allies in Asia that are struggling democracies like Thailand and the Philippines. Those are important countries for us. And often when we go to Asia, therefore, we don't talk that much about democracy or even values necessarily. Those can be some tricky subjects. Instead, we talk about what we call the rules-based order. So focusing on rules rather than values. But then we come to Europe. And the reality is it's very different in Europe. We can't just talk about shared interests and try and build the coalition we need to deal with the China challenge. In Europe, in my view, we have to talk about shared values. And those values are actually part of what brings the United States and Europe together on a whole range of issues. And I think there are 4 big ones that we should be focusing on. The first is on the geostrategy side, maybe the military side, if you want to call it that. The second is about economics. The third is about technology. And the last is what I would call global governance. And in each of those areas, I think values are actually quite important to us. And so part of what is particularly challenging now for the United States is that we have to do both talking about values and talking about interests. And we have to do it with different allies and partners at different times. And to be very honest, we just haven't been particularly good at this recently. And I think it's very hard sometimes for friends around the world to hear Americans talk about democratic values today when you see what's happening in the United States in terms of our own democracy. And so this idea that the United States should be out in the world lecturing friends about being better democracies while we have the events of January 6th and even the last couple of years in everyone's mind, I think that's particularly difficult. And so what I think the United States has to do is shift its approach from what I think is maybe lecturing sometimes on values issues to a much more cooperative approach where actually we have a lot to learn from our friends about what makes their democracies successful. With some of our other friends, we're probably not going to talk as much about values. And so this is something that I have tried to put forward over the last year or two. The piece that might be most of interest to some of you in the audience is a report that came out almost exactly a year ago. It was from the organization that I co-direct called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. And it was called Linking Values to Strategy. And the argument was that we have to incorporate values more into our strategy. This was a bit of an implicit critique of the Trump administration, right, which was inherently transactional, particularly with our allies in Europe. But I think this is also a little bit of a warning to the Biden administration. And that report actually involved a lot of the Biden administration team. It was part of a task force. It was co-chaired by Avril Haines, who's now the Director of National Intelligence. It included Jake Sullivan and Kurt Campbell, who are both at the White House, and a whole bunch of other officials. And part of what we were trying to argue was that we have to be able to integrate both interests and values into US foreign policy and to talk about them at the same time. So let me just give a couple of quick pictures of why I think this is important. Take the technology area. So obviously the US and Europe have some pretty difficult technology issues to work through. Things like privacy regulations, taxation, these are really tough issues. If we just focus on our differences on those issues and our different interests on those issues, I think we're going to be in a very difficult spot. If you step back a little bit, though, and you think about our common values on technology, they're significant, right? Whereas the Russians and the Chinese, to some extent, have been pushing a technology vision that would be relatively closed, in which governments control the access that people have to information. We believe in our societies that actually information should be free and open and transparent. And that's a fundamental value. And I think it's something that binds us together in the technology sphere. The same is true on economics, right? Increasingly, we are seeing state-driven economies that are limiting much of what their individual people can do, or that are unfairly stealing information and technology, that are subsidizing state industries unfairly. Those are not just interests, they're values as well, right? We value open economic systems. We value allowing everyone to thrive in those systems. And I think if we just focus on the interests and, what sometimes the United States has done recently, right? Focus on trade deficits. That's actually a very short-term way of thinking, whereas these values are the much longer-term way of approaching the issue. So just my final comment before I hand it back to you all in Rome is, I think we have to be working towards building 4 different coalitions. As I said, one on military strategy, one on economic strategy, one on technology, and one on global governance. And Europe is critical to all of those, and Italy is critical to all of those. And we can't just do that by talking about interests. We have to do it also by talking about values. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Thank you. Now the floor is given to Mario De Pizzo, journalist of RAI. Thank you.
I'm very happy that this room is full of young students. I try to explain why. You are the proof that we need democracy and freedom. Your generation said us one thing. We have to save our planet. And the establishment changed their programs, their economic programs. This is possible only in an open society. And now this is a way for our economic system. The whole world pays Chinese development. In China, there's a big problem with the environment, with the pollution, for the iron production and others. This is the main point, but we are, I think, in the century of science and technological innovation. According to Karl Popper, science to grow up needs freedom. And in the last century, the progress of democracy and the progress of science have produced our way to live. And I think that the innovation needs a debate. Progress needs freedom in the university and in the whole scientific system. Also, the battle against COVID is a proof of this. Our vaccines are better than Chinese ones and Russian ones. And I think that also in other fields, science can succeed in only with a free community of scientists. For these reasons, I think that values are important, and values have also an economic importance. But we need a long vision. We can right now we have to consider that China is very fast in innovation, technology, in artificial intelligence, and maybe at the first time it's difficult to US and Europe to follow China, but US and Europe have to work together for the global competition in order to preserve our way to live, our freedom, because of the fact values are not enough. So I think that US and Europe have to rebuild their agreement. Biden said that Europe has to decide with whom to play the global competition. China has a lot of interest in Europe. The Belt and Road Initiative was a project to grow up in Europe. But right now, I think that Europe has to choose. And the best way is to preserve freedom and democracy in a new alliance with US and the other democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Pizzo. Now the floor is given to prestigious guest, Ambassador Guido Lenzi. I believe, Ambassador, in your long and prestigious career, you faced and experienced a lot of talks like that. Can we have your point of view? Also because you are author of a book called Diplomazia. So you can tell us more about this issue. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Well, let me start by saying, stimulated by what Zach Cooper told us about the relationship between values and interests. Let me say from the outset that in my view, in my experience, I have acquired the conviction that the highest value is interests. Interests nowadays have become the highest value. But how do you get to interest through values? That is the issue that we will be discussing today. We should not separate the two, one or the other. They are not alternatives. The common interest of humanity, common interest of the various regions of the world are to be considered as the highest value nowadays to preserve. That being said, we've all been informed that the strategic axis has shifted from the continental hard land masses, Ukraine, in Europe, Kashmir, Himalaya, Afghanistan, in Asia, etc., from the land masses to the wide open seas. It's a long dispute, a strategic, geopolitical dispute, which has lasted for 100 years. You students may have heard of Mackinder landmass and Spickman and Mahan, Admiral Mahan contention that the most important thing were not the land masses, but rather the rim countries around the seas. The sea strategy has been for a whole century, if you really look through history as it developed. The sea was the place throughout the 20th century, was the place where strategies and conflicts appeared. I mean, we know what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to elaborate too much. So it is the wide open seas that are today more than ever the locus where international competition, confrontation occur. Nowhere more so than in the Indo-Pacific region, in the Pacific area. All the way from India to Japan, to America, North America, Canada, and America. America is a Pacific country. Don't let Chinese or anybody else argue otherwise. America belongs to the Pacific. South America, Western South America is Pacific, and Peru, Chile know it very well. Then New Zealand, Australia, plus the enormous number of islands in Polynesia, Guam, and not only the American bases across the Pacific, but also the various islands in the Pacific, which have been taken over, are starting to be taken over by China. I had the fortune to go to Guam. I won't tell you why. There's no harbor, not in Guam. I'm talking about another island where there is no harbor. There is just cement a bridge where ships dock. That cement bridge was built by the Chinese, and there is a plaque saying the Republic of China has granted. So a very cost-effective presence. Big ships can now dock on this island thanks to the Chinese presence. So it's not only a matter of military, but also of economic and infrastructure expansion of China in the whole area. The great game has gone, the great game all the way to Afghanistan that lasted in the 19th century and even in the 20th century, has now shifted from land, from Afghanistan, that crucial fault line, has shifted into the wide open maritime space of the Pacific. This is a fact. It has already happened, which means, I apologize, which means that the whole area that has lived in the margins of world politics forever. The whole area has been not been involved in the great disputes and the great conflicts. Apart from Vietnam, Vietnam was a special case, but in general, the whole area has lived in the margins of the great world strategy. Nowadays, the whole area is being brought into, this is something new, brought into the fray of international politics. We heard about AUKUS, didn't you? I suppose you read and you heard about it. AUKUS and the Quad, which is being resumed. There was a meeting of the Quad. I've had a long diplomatic career, as you've heard. I had never heard of Quad. Maybe it happened, maybe they had meetings, but diplomats were not involved or concerned or informed about it. There has been last week, the first ever that I'm aware of, meeting of the Quad countries. Quad meaning India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. The four, as it were, the four cardinal points of the whole Indo-Pacific region. India, Japan, Australia, and America. They are the ones who are trying to compare notes about how to react or even preserve the influence that they have had historically and otherwise in the whole area. It's not a matter of challenging China, responding to China, containing China. It's more a matter of a resumption of the awareness, political and strategic awareness of the countries of the area, of their own role, of the role that they have to perform. They are not passively submitting to the great game. They have become part of the great strategic game. This is something completely new for the area. Non-alignment for those countries, basically, India, Indonesia, etc., non-aligned proponents in the past. Non-alignment is not an option anymore for these countries. They have to decide what they're going to do when they grow up, which, by the way, is something that the European Union itself has to do. So we're not talking about an abstraction. We know exactly what it means in Europe. We should start to realize what it must mean for the Indo-Pacific islands. Think of it. India has no partners. India has no partners in the area. Its relationship with Pakistan is, as you know, very contentious. China, they have military spats up in the Himalaya all the time. Burma, Myanmar, they don't have a working relationship with Myanmar or with Ceylon. India is alone, big, huge, the greatest democracy in the world, but it doesn't have any partners. So it should try to find partners, like-minded partners, not alliances. Alliances are meaning military alliances, are not the game that is being played in today. Military alliances are not the important issue. What I want to stress is that it's not the military, it's the economy that has always driven the world. Economy has always been the mover of international relations. Ever since the 3,000 years before Christ, between the Egyptians and the Hittites, their diplomatic contacts that they had, which I mentioned in the famous book that you now are aware of that I wrote, the tablets with the tablets of that time which have a diplomatic content, stress the importance that the Egyptians, pharaohs, and Hittites attributed to the exchanges, economic exchanges between them. Economy is the mover of the world, has always been the mover of the world, which military strength impeded very often. So this is a long introduction to say something that addresses the subject that we're tackling today: European Union, US, and China. These are three quite different actors. So how can Europe make itself be heard and influence, be present in this area? Europe has to be present in the area, it has to be said, but it can be present in the area. Because of the following considerations that I will try to list. The European Union is the only inherently multilateral actor. No, America is not, China, Russia are not multilaterally minded. Europe is nothing else but multilateral. And when we speak about a European army needing to be established, I am very skeptical, because European Union purpose is not about military might. It's about the importance of cooperation and of social interconnection. The European Union is therefore less obtrusive interlocutor. What Europe does, and what Europe everywhere, not only in Asia, but also in Africa and Latin America, what have you, Europe is not obtrusive. It does not obstruct or does not condition its presence. It is interested, of course, but not assertive in its international presence. It should therefore be able to enlist the attention of the like-minded partners in the area. And there are like-minded partners, not only Japan and South Korea, which are, for all intents and purposes, our brothers. They're Western. They belong to the Western group of nations, for all intents and purposes. But also Vietnam is, as you know, has been moving in our direction in terms of awareness of the fundamental strategic interest. So what the European Union can do is to exert an influence in promoting regional cooperation. Our leader will, I will soon end it, but I think we will then ask our moderator to jump into this discussion, because the ASEAN is not, there are meetings between the European Union and ASEAN. There have been regular yearly meetings between the two, but there are meetings between two different organizations. ASEAN is not, should grow into a strategic political association of nations, which it should do, and European Union should influence it and prod it in this direction. Final thought, we can then go on, but I mean, the final thought that I would have is that Europe should avoid, by all means, to be seen in that area, as much as in other areas that are not the European strategic theater. Europe should avoid to be seen as a junior partner of America in that part of the world. In Europe, it's essential. In the Mediterranean, still to a certain extent. But in the new areas, in the new theaters, strategic theaters, European Union should develop what Macron has said, and others, should develop its own autonomous strategy, autonomie stratégique, etc. Because the Anglo sphere, the group of Anglo countries are already at work. Canada, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, they are the English-speaking Anglo. They have the same mentality and the same approach. And besides, they are already there in the area. If Europe wants to get into the area as an important, influential actor, it has to develop and to emphasize its own special, different type of policy, based not on military strength, but on the cooperative integration process that it has been experiencing itself. But this is basically what I had to say.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your enlightening and comprehensive report. Now the floor is given to Emiliano Battisti, editorial coordinator of Caffè Geopolitico, geopolitical coffee or geopolitical espresso, if you like it, and responsible from North America desk over there. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So my expertise is about North America and US, so I will start talking about the US. I would like to start with imagining a picture. A picture about January the 6th. You know what happened January the 6th. We are here to talk about democratic values. And we know that for decades, the United States has been the light of democracy for Europe, for Western Europe. But now this is changed because democracy in the US is not so strong. The American society is very divided, you know, during the last months of the Trump administration, we saw what can happen when a society is so deeply divided, and the institutions are a little bit weakened by this kind of situation. The American democracy resisted is there, fortunately. But we have to talk about and we have to think about our democracies before starting to go abroad to think about the relation with China and the other countries that are not democracies, because some problems are also in Europe. We know the discussions in those days in the European Parliament about Poland, the Hungary case, and so on. And the problem is that we have to share these values to be also united, because countries like China, countries like Russia are ready to exploit our divisions. Economically, socially, they are ready to infiltrate or even a little bit of even a little bit of a little hole in the wall is something is enough. For example, you remember during the first months of the COVID crisis that almost all countries started to block the exportations of medical devices, and so Russia and China were ready to say, "Oh, here we are. We will help you. We will send you medical expertise, medical staff, and also medical infrastructure, and so on." So the message is that before talking about the competitive advantages of democracies and democratic values, we have to start to watch our values, to defend our values, so we have the power to go outside and talk about these values. Because as our moderator said at the beginning, democracy is a choice. It's not a certain future. It's not destiny. It's a choice. we have to make this choice every day. And your generation, the young generation, is up to this choice. You have to watch. You have to watch our generation. I'm a little bit older than you, but let's say that. And you have to, what I say, watch our generation and push us toward the democratic values, so to defend them and so to promote them abroad with diplomatically and with sharing practices and so on. Not with military, we saw that is not possible. So this is the message, the core message I would like to send to you, and I conclude with that my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open the floor to the public for questions and answers, I would like Zach Cooper to elaborate a bit on your possible answer that Ambassador Lanzi gave to you about the contradiction between interests and values that you highlighted in your speech. According to Ambassador, there is a possible synthesis of this possible contradiction once you state that cultivate your own interest is actually a value itself. Of course, if I'm not wrong, if you do it properly, not violently, you do not impose anything. But if you negotiate your interest, that is a virtue or a value itself. Can this be a solution of the antithesis that you yourself highlighted? Thank you.
Thank you. I very much agree. I think it's very difficult to separate interests and values. And when we do our diplomacy right, they really should be combined. And I think part of the challenge in Washington is that you do have some people arguing that actually we should separate values and interests and we should ignore one or the other. And I think this is impossible, just as the ambassador said, right? Good diplomacy is about convincing your friends that your interests and values align with theirs, and making your interests their values and vice versa. And I think that's one thing that if you look back at the US relationship with Europe over the last 70 years, we've done a remarkably good job at this, right? We have built societies which share a huge number of interests and values. I think if we can't do that in the next couple of decades, we're going to have a very difficult time. And so part of my opening remarks was a reaction to this move by some Americans to say, oh, we should ignore values when it comes to China. We should just be focused on interests. And we shouldn't complain about Chinese actions in Hong Kong or Xinjiang or Tibet or information controls, because these values issues are relatively unimportant, and we should just focus on interests, right? We should focus on trade. I think this is impossible. First, if you look at polling globally, but of the American people in particular, the thing that makes the American people pay most attention to an issue, it's values, right? That's actually what's concerned them most about the last few years. And so making sure that we can all get on the same page on which values and which interests we share, I think it's critical, and trying to combine them is the right approach. So I very much agree with the ambassador.
Thank you. Any comment from the side, ambassador, and other speakers?
If we can.
Yeah.
If we can, if I can respond briefly to that. For example, what is the Chinese interest in gobbling up Hong Kong? That's a question. It's an open question. What is the Chinese interest in threatening Taiwan? It's a question. regardless of whether Hong Kong is one China, two China, Taiwan is the third China. So these are abstract political contentious issues. But what is the interest of China in behaving in such a provocative, aggressive way? What is the intention of China? That is what diplomats do for a living, by the way, huh? Trying to find out what the other guy's argument is based upon in order to be able to establish some kind of contact. We have lost contact with Beijing. We don't know what's going on there, apart from what she says, because he's the big boss and what he says. I was in Russia for 4 years. I remember when I was there with Brezhnev. Now we have she. You know, what Brezhnev said was the verb. Now it's she's. Two other issues. You know, when you talk about interest, you have to realize that we all have to realize that we are in a globalized world. And this was mentioned by my friends here. In a global world, values differ, obviously. The West is West and East is East, and never shall the twain meet, said Kipling. By the way, if you read the ballad ends by saying that the difference between the two, East and West, exists, but they are not incompatible. Read the whole ballad. It's quite an interesting piece. Something that I should have said in my previous intervention, but I will say now, is that democracy, which is the value that we have been addressing here at the table, democracy is not about the Whigs in the Chamber of Lords and the House of Lords. Democracy is participation. Democracy equals participation, the widest possible participation. That is why I argue that even such different countries as the countries along the rim of the Indo-Pacific, they have different interests, they have different values, but they should still participate in some kind of a common design, as it were, strategy, establish some kind of a common denominator, because democracy is participation. If there is no participation, like in China, they have elections, apparently. In Russia, they have elections, but as far as I understand, there is no participation. I think we can establish participation. We should establish participation among the Pacific countries. You disagree, but we'll have a discussion about that. Finally, you know, the dilemma out of which we should try to extract the countries along the rim of the Pacific is the dilemma that they are stuck into between the advantages of economic cooperation with China, which are there, even in Europe, by the way, they are there, and the security protection from America. You cannot separate the two anymore. Say, you know, I will take the investment from China, and in any case, America will protect me against Chinese hegemony. That dilemma should be broken, as it were. These countries should understand that there is a way to establish their own dignity as actors, international actors, through democracy, through participation, through establishing a common denominator that can be made to be accepted both by China and America, by the way. And Europe is the partner that is best able to argue to make such argument.
Thank you. We have some time left for questions. How many? So I think you have a priority since before, and then we can move. You will be the second. Okay, please introduce yourself, and please go straight to the question. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. My name is Fokina Evelina. Thank you a lot for your speech. I'm coming from Russia, and I'm the global governance second-year student of the University. So my first question is rather a comment because I didn't really get how exactly by exporting the technologies during the COVID, China and Russia broke and disturbed democratic values of the rest of the world. Because it seems for me, but sometimes technique which is used by some speakers and politicians in general, not specifically talking about this, is either a defense or hate towards the others, meaning that we will say that these are wrong, but we will not discuss our own issues. And the second question I had refers to the beginning of the discussion about industrialization and China and Russia being polluting the economy, the ecology, which is true unarguably. But I was thinking, since both of the countries are the developing countries and they're following the pattern of capitalistic model, capitalistic society, which America has imposed after the Cold War, since we had two different polarized world, which was either we go to communist society or capitalist society, capitalism won. And since they're going now through industrialization process, maybe the problem is that they're influenced by this capitalistic model society, and America probably can impose and offer some different kind of perspective, some different kind of model. And I want to ask, in your opinion, maybe America is now responsible for shaping different kind of model instead of continue offering the capitalistic view. Thank you. And I still want to have the discussion about Russian elections.
Okay, shall we collect, let's say, 4 questions for the moment? So you second, you third, and you 4 for the moment. Please, go ahead. Try to be short, as much as you can.
My name is Benjamin. Second year student from Tor Vergata. My question regards, does the West, US and Europe, have moral standing in criticizing the lack of values in China, the lack of values in China in the pursuit of economic development, looking at the historical way that where the West, US and Europe achieved their strong economies that they have today.
Okay, thank you. Number 3. Then collect 4 for the moment, and then it will be possibly possibly the number 5. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Valerio Nejumi, second year global governance student at Tor Vergata University. So I have a question regarding the geographical definition that you give us of the Pacific area and on the role that the European Union has there. So some 50 years ago, Europe was seen as a mediator between Russia and the US. Now maybe a more unified actor is on the scene. And what is his role? Is a mediator now or a third actor in the international scenario? Thank you.
Number 4. If we have time.
Hello, I am Simona. First of all, thank you for your speech. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, sure. So first of all, thank you for your speech. I actually really appreciated it. I just was thinking about something. So we all talked about values as being important, of like the democratic values as being the most important factor in this race we are having against China and everything. However, I was thinking about such values because then there is the expert of the US, and maybe he will talk about it. What values are there in the US where the population is so polarized that the vaccine is not even spreading in the states where Trump was seen as the winner of the electors. So in a sense, this race cannot be won in countries where the values of democratic existence are not even spread normally, and where opinions are such that they get even more and more polarized as days goes on and as years goes on. Moreover, the will of expanding democracy throughout the world failed greatly. Afghanistan fell over Taliban's. Like trying to establish democracies in Africa failed greatly, and we are uncertain of our own democracies, where Nazi parties and extreme right parties grow constantly. So my question is, what do you think of all of this? There is not even, we saw it with the mayor of Rome, not even 50% of the population went to vote. So what advantages do we have in a post-society where values do not even persist? So in a sense, economically, we are weaker. Values are not even well spread.
Please.
What's the problem?
Okay, we understand the question. Let's try to answer to these initial 4 questions. I'd like to do this. Mr. Cooper, you first, then Ambassador, then if you want to say something, if there is a possibility I will say something, try to be short. Try to go straight to the point. Diligent. Please.
Well, I'll try and be as brief as possible. I think there's a stream of questions that are very good and very much in the same line, which is really about the nature of democracy and really a questioning in our own societies of whether democracy is succeeding. And I think this is why when President Biden talks about the challenge of working with other democracies, we're not talking anymore about the US trying to impose democracy on other countries, right? So this isn't telling our friends what they should do, or even our opponents what they should do in terms of democratic principles. This is more about working together to figure out how we can make our democracies function effectively. And so I think when we have this Summit for Democracy, which President Biden is going to host in December, I hope that that effort doesn't focus on what we would call democracy promotion abroad, but really focuses on enhancing cooperation with other democracies to make our democracies as successful as possible. That doesn't mean telling China and Russia what they should be doing internal to their countries. I accept that those are choices for the Chinese and the Russian people to make. But when I think about the values that we need to work on together, I think of this mostly as a look internally to ourselves about what we have to fix in our own countries. And then we can build on that foundation once it's a bit stronger to focus more on how to strengthen democratic principles broadly. But I think, as many of the questioners have noted, right now, we need to get our democracies functioning more effectively first before we talk about anything externally.
Thank you. Ambassador, you want to say something, maybe giving an answer to her?
4 brief comments on what was said. First of all, the ideological division between capitalism, communism, etc., etc. I mean, do we realize that China is a communist capitalism, and there is therefore no more in a globalized world, no more the distinction between us and them, between West is West, East is East. Speaking of China values, who asked about Chinese values? You did, I think, back there. Uyghur. Is that a value, or is that an objectionable behavior by a country in suffocating minorities? And WTO, is China actually participating honestly as it should, since it has become a member of the WTO in 2001? It is not. Is that a value? Yes, belonging to a club and behaving by the rules of the club is a value. That also is a value. It is so much of a value that it has become an interest. European Union as mediator No, European Union cannot, in the present world of confrontation, European Union cannot be a mediator. It is Venus, like Kagan said, while the others would be Marses around the world. Europe is the alternative. Europe is the future. Europe has been the future ever since the end of the war. It's an example, it's a model of how things should develop. France and Germany have fought 3 wars against each other, dragging Europe into them before deciding that enough was enough and that there was another way of competing. They're still competing, because the Macron and Madame Merkel are still competing quite harshly. But I mean, it's a different type of competition. So Europe is the alternative to what is happening. And it's there. Finally, about exporting democracy. Somebody may know, should we export democracy? And you also, Zach, mentioned this fact. What happened in Tahrir Square? Was that exporting democracy? Was that a CIA conspiracy in Egypt, in Tahrir Square? In Ukraine, in Kiev, was that exporting democracy? That was the people of these countries that in a globalized world, shorn of ideological competition, value competition, decided, what we need is protection, prosperity for our own personal benefit, and a belly full. Having a full belly, freedom from fear and freedom from want. These are important things. And those come not from top. We're not exporting democracy. This is the rising democracy in different ways, in different countries, even in Russia and in Italy, by the way. But I repeat, democracy is participation. And wherever there is no participation, regardless of what the Constitution says, there is no democracy.
I don't know if the other gentleman would like to say something. Please go ahead.
Very quickly. First, the medical stuff and democracy's values and so think about a strategic point of view first. Because when you have some help from a country that is not your ally, you create a relation that is not equal. One is superior or on the other, because you owe something to the other country. In this case, particularly, it's not strictly connected with democratic values, because a ventilator is not a democratic value. We know that. But European Union and Russia or China, especially China, are not allies. They are not allied. There's trade partnerships, diplomatic partnerships. So it's correct. But we have to think about something that another country that is not our ally is inside our alliance, our union. So we have to stay a little bit alerted. That's all. This is not other things. Very quickly about your question, United States democracy and also Italian elections. It's up to us. It's up to us to pretend more from the society, from the politician, and as the ambassador said, participate. Because if we first say, no, why I should vote, they are always the same, and but it will change nothing. If we start that, nothing will happen. So it's up to us, I think. And about your question, are we in a position to explore democracy? No, we have to in a position, in my opinion, we are in a position to talk about democracy and share some practices or our values, but share, not impose, not try to change a country culture, a country government, because it's up to their people to choose what is best for them.
You want to say something?
Do you like human rights? So we have to defend democracy. That's only one way. Even though we have made mistakes like exporting democracy in Iraq, it was a mistake. But we have to preserve our model of living. And the main challenge for us is the European construction. Europe is the actor for a lot of fields. One of these is the space. We have to rule the space, and we have to decide with whom we want to rule the space. The space and the space economy. Europe has to build its national interest. We have to rebuild an agreement between Paris, Berlin, and Rome after the Brexit. Europe needs a new construction. But the field for Europe is the West, because freedom and democracy are our identity, and nobody has to sell its identity.
Thank you. Allow me to say a few words about the situation in Southeast Asia, or the ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. As Ambassador said, the situation in South China Sea, Mar Cinese and Meridionale, is very tense now. China is challenging the order that took shape after World War II. That area is called the ruled by the so-called Pax Americana. Now China claims huge territories, huge pieces of sea, and the point which was raised before is what the Asian countries there will do. Usually they were balancing themselves between the protection and security guaranteed by the American fleet and the economic help guaranteed by China. And now they have to choose, because this lucky combination of protection is no longer guaranteed. So huge countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, they must take a decision, and probably the situation will become even more tense in that part of the world. So that's why the US, together with other states like Australia, India, and Japan, they gave birth to the so-called Quad, the Quadrilateral Association of Democracy, just to contain China. Now, let's make another round to collect 4 questions. Again, state your name and go straight to the question. First, second, third, and fourth. Okay.
Thank you very much, speakers. I truly enjoyed your conversation. I'm Rani Al-Sarakabi from the second year of Global Governance, and I'm from Syria, a country that lived under Russian influence, a country with so-called elections as well. And I also lived in Malaysia, a country in ASEAN. And now I'm lucky to be here in Europe, a country with democracy, where I can be treated as a normal human being. So first of all, I'm glad to see leaders like you finally speaking up, because I have to be honest, I was a bit worried when I saw young people looking up to China, I mean, People in the US, for example, attacking their own police, for example, all these things, where to begin, and looking up, raising communist slogans, raising communist symbols. So that's something else. But I would like to talk to you in terms of European governments, in terms of the West, the US. What could these countries do to strengthen their alliances? Their alliance is no longer the US-Europe or US-Japan, it's all together. We are seeing that, for example, there was the recent submarine deal with Australia that caused a rift with France, and these countries should be together. We're ASEAN, for example, as you mentioned, Your Excellency, it's still divided. There is no ASEAN community. I lived in Malaysia for 6 years. Nobody speaks of ASEAN. You only see the flag flying every now and there, but every here and there, but that's it. Hong Kong was taken. Democracy there, gone. Freedom of speech, gone. Taiwan today, and what's tomorrow?
Please go to the question.
So my question is, what could these countries do in the immediate future to start countering the influence of China and Russia? Thank you.
Okay. Number 2 was you. Yeah.
I am Nicoletta. I am a second-year student from global governance, and I am from Italy. And during your speeches, which I really would like to thank you for, if I understood correctly, you argued that democracy is not the only formula for a successful economical development. And in this sense, China proved that different paths lead more or less to the same results. Moreover, Ambassador Lenzi suggested that nowadays interest values overcome democratic values as drivers for these development. So my question is, according to you, of course, I'm interested in your opinion, not as democratic supporters, but as economists, as researchers, ambassadors, and journalists. Could this non-democratic development last in the long term? And isn't democracy the only real tool for a continuous, maybe slower, but as I said, long-lasting success? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3 was given to you. Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for your contributions for this interesting and thought-provoking conversation. My name is Alexandra Mityakina. I come from Kazakhstan, and I'm a second-year student of global governance. And my question refers to pursuit of common prosperity and relation of democracy to it. So as it was mentioned, scientific and industrial growth, it is better in democracy conditions than in other authoritarian governments. So could there be any measures taken by the global community, both European or American or together, to promote democracy as a tool to grow economically and also technologically? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. You.
Good afternoon. My name is Alessandro Dieria, second-year global governance student. First of all, thank you for your distinguished speech. Some days ago, we were presented the idea of a federal European Union as a state in order to perceive the democratic ideal that are perceived in all the states of the European Union. My question is whether the democratic values that are perceived as participation, but are perceived as participation in different ways through all the countries of a European Union, how could a federal European Union be seen as a non-utopian idea, whether all these different values, all these different perceiving of these values are now present, and how this federal union could be threatened by countries as Belarus and the role of Lukashenko? How would it be possible? Thank you.
Thank you. Same story. Zach, you start first. Please.
Well, again, a great series of questions. Let me just take one common line and then let the other speakers address the other issues. So I think this argument is exactly right, that democracies over the long term actually provide better for their people. In the short term, there's no question that autocratic systems can do remarkable things, right? And even perhaps over the medium term, right? We've seen China take huge steps economically over the last 30 or 40 years. Of course, that ignores the fact that for the couple of decades before that, China took tremendous steps backwards economically. And that right now, I think we're seeing Beijing have remarkable difficulty managing economic growth. And in fact, China is cracking down on its own technology sector. I think part of the reason is when you have an autocratic system, the leaders in that system, they want to maintain their hold on power. That means that any potential power base that is not central to the Leninist party, in this case, the Communist Party of China, is a potential threat. And this is a challenge that you don't quite have in a democracy, right? Democracies are much better able, if they're working properly, to integrate these new economic centers and actually not just stimulate innovation, but encourage it to be part of the political process. Whereas what we're seeing in China right now is that, you know, these tech titans who've built giant companies are seen by the Communist Party as a threat. And so they're being cut down to size. And so I think over the long term, this is something that we as democracies have to demonstrate, that we can manage technology effectively. I think a lot of my friends in Europe have questions about whether we're doing that right now, you know, whether American companies have the proper privacy standards, whether we tax them properly. These are all fair questions. But I think the questioners are exactly right that over the long term, we have to show that democracy is not just a good political system, but that it can deliver results economically. And I think that's a big part of what the US-EU Trade and Technology Council has to do. And let me just say one final thing on one of the early questions, which is that I agree, we can't just be thinking of democracies as the West, you know, sort of a transatlantic concept of democracies. We have to expand our view. That's one reason that I really liked what the British tried to do earlier this year with what they call the D10. So building on the G7 by adding India, Australia, and South Korea, we have to expand the group of democracies that we work with. It can't just be the G7 grouping, which is heavily transatlantic. We have to have a much broader view of democracy, in my view, to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Ambassador, your turn.
Fortunately, I don't have the last word, which I don't think anybody has, but it's a process, and we are witnessing a process worldwide. I want to dispel a couple of misunderstandings that may have crept up. Interests are not to be opposed to democracy. Interests do not trump democracy. Democracy is about interests, right? So we're not talking about democracy and interest as two different avenues towards the future. They must be strictly connected. Democracy over there said, but there are different democracies. Of course. But I said that democracy is not about the wigs of the British lords, because in Afghanistan, there was democracy before the Russians intervened. It was called the Loya Jirga, the Great Assembly. And the elder, which has always happened in the history of humanity, the elder came together, discussed things, distributed, compromised between the various tribes, etc. It was not a Western democracy, but it was democracy because, I repeat, democracy is participation. And each different civilization, tribe, group declines that in a different way, provided there is participation. You cannot say that the Taliban are democratic We're waiting for them to become democratic, allowing women back in university, not chopping off the heads of those who disagree with them and things like that. That is the repulsive side of autocracy. But, you know, and there again, autocratic capitalism. Somebody mentioned, oh, how China was successful with capitalism, etc. But autocratic capitalism is an oxymoron. You cannot have capitalism with autocracy. It doesn't work. It didn't work in Russia. It is not going to work in China. And we read about that there are big concerns, economic concerns that are collapsing. They're spending too much money, etc. If there isn't the involvement of the various parts of the society, you do not have democracy. And if you don't have democracy, you do not have prosperity. And well, we tend to equate prosperity with capitalism, but that is capitalism is the one way of getting from here to there. The other avenues are not as conclusive. I mean, have not exemplary. This is all I have to say.
Want to say something?
I want to answer to you about Europe. Europe needs industrial cooperation to grow up. We need a partnership, alliance among big corp in the energy and all of the industries. And we have an opportunity with the digital transition and also with climate change to do it. But we need policy for this project. And I think it's a possible way. In the next years, Europe will grow up in a new construction. Right now, we have a common debt for the first time, no? And maybe we will make other steps.
Just a couple of words. First, to you for the question about economic and technology in democracies. Just quick examples. The green economy started in the West, in the democracies. Social media were born in democracies, with all their problems, with all their controversies and so. But think about that, the power of this mean when now a government that choose to silence his people do not turn off TV, do not turn off the radio, turn off social media. And social media were born in the democracies. So just two examples that technology and democracies can go together, and democracy can also boost technology and innovation. And for the question about what can Europe and US do to stop China and Russia influence, is not to trying to stop it, but simply to make us, European Union or the United States, more attractive to other countries. It's good to do deals with us. It's up to us to try to be more attractive than them, because it's the only way we have to compete with them.
Thank you. It seems that the backbone of the answer is that democracy is not a given. We have to fight for it. We have to protect it. That handle democracy is rather more difficult than to export democracy, given the results we witness. Now, I think we are going to conclude. So before I do, let me thank you for your warm participation and the brightness of your questions. My friends, Ambassador Guido Lenzi, Mr. Mario De Pizzo, Mr. Emiliano Battisti, and my friend and colleague Zach Cooper from the American Enterprise Institute from Washington, D.C. Thank Zach. Just to be foresighted, just to see in anticipation the questions that we might face, in 30 minutes there will be another seminar here whose title is Europe Awakening, il risveglio dell'Europa. So just to give credit to the Festival della Democrazia and Mr. Bartolucci, we anticipate problems and we face solutions. Thank you all.